Greetings, viewers. I am Eric the Car Guy, but you knew that already because you're smart. But this is the ETCG1 channel, and I start things off on ETCG1 with, hey, if it's your birthday, happy birthday. Please enjoy this digital cake I found for you. Today's topic comes from the news. I know I shouldn't pay attention to it, but this in particular involves us, well, car people, let's say. And it involves the closing, well, not the closing, but the transition of a major diesel engine manufacturing plant switching from making diesel engines over to electric motors. And this is in northeastern France, I believe, in a town called Tremery. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, but major engine plant in France that's been producing diesel engines for years has said they're no longer going to produce diesel engines. They're going to convert everything over to making electric motors. Now, this begs the question, is this the end of the diesel engine? Well, maybe I should be a little more specific with that, because I don't think it is. But it may be the end of diesel engines in passenger vehicles. Let's clarify that, because let's face it, diesel is everywhere. The shipping industry, the construction industry, the transportation industry, big trucks and things like that. Yes, Tesla and I think Nikola is the other company. Yes, there are a couple of tractor trailers that are becoming all electric, and that's becoming a thing. But as far as the passenger car market, I think consumers dictate how that works a little more. Getting back to the point of the diesel engine being dead in passenger vehicles, the last nail in the coffin might have actually happened back in 2015, I think it was, when Dieselgate happened, where Volkswagen was claiming clean diesel technology and gassed a bunch of monkeys to basically cheat the system. But in Volkswagen's defense, if there is one, I don't think they were the only company guilty of that. And I think the reason is there's only so far that you can take things in an engineering sense. And with things like internal combustion, or in this case, diesel. And diesel is, well, more economical. In fact, well, here in the States, we don't see a whole lot of diesel passenger vehicles. They do exist, yes, but they're not as prevalent as they are in Europe. And I think the reason for that is because in Europe, their fuel cost is a lot higher than it is for us in the States. And diesel is a much more economic, option over gasoline engines. So I think that's one of the reasons that diesel has proliferated the European market. But we're talking about a major European diesel engine manufacturer saying, no more diesel, we're going to electric motors. And this may be the sea change, this may be the thing. I don't want to forget to mention that behind me, I've purposely parked myself in front of the Element, because for a time, I entertained the thought of turning the Element into a diesel, because I believe there is a diesel version of the CR-V that's sold in Europe, and the Element and the CR-V share the same chassis underpinnings. So theoretically, it would be possible to take one of those diesel engines from Europe and put it into the Element. I thought that would be the coolest thing, to have an Element that was diesel powered. And I really was thinking this around the time, let's say 2007, 8-ish, when fuel prices were really high, which speaks to my point about fuel costs helping to drive the market for what we do. And that's one of the reasons I was thinking about turning the Element into that. But also, diesel has the ability to run on biofuels, so you could run it on just about anything in a way. It's not necessarily clean, and that's kind of where we're going with this, but it's kind of nice to have in a situation where you need to run some fuel and maybe you don't have access to gasoline, which goes through a lengthy refining process in order to become the stuff that you put into your tank. Now, for years, we've also had things like Tesla, who has come from out of nowhere to be competing with the big three here in the US and around the world. Electric vehicles are here to stay. And some of you might argue, ooh, hydrogen power and all that, but this is kind of a similar situation to what happened in the early 1900s, when there was sort of the choice between the internal combustion engine, electric vehicles, and also steam-powered vehicles. But it was the discovery of oil in Texas that made the gasoline engine the most viable option, because it was the most economical at the time. So we went in that direction. And here we are today. But we're looking back thinking, okay, air pollution, that kind of thing, we kind of want to try to curb that stuff and move in a different direction. So electric vehicles, I think, are becoming more and more prominent. And as far as things like hydrogen vehicles is another alternative, I think there's a big expense there, more expensive than electric vehicles. One of the things that was mentioned in the article that I read about the diesel plant that's switching over to electric motors, there's a heck of a lot less parts inside of an electric motor than there is inside of a diesel engine. So what are they going to do with their workforce, since they probably aren't going to need the entire workforce? Well, the answer to that, according to them, was they were going to let the older workforce retire out and not replace them, and then retrain everybody else to do things in an electric motor sense instead of making diesel engines. To that point I was trying to make about hydrogen powered vehicles, it's my understanding that there's very expensive components involved with that. And it's not that it's not a viable option, it's just that I think, as the example I mentioned in the early 1900s, it's cost that drives it, and consumer demand as well. And it seems that there's a love affair right now with electric vehicles, and it might be Tesla's fault for becoming so popular. I mean, granted, Teslas aren't the greatest vehicles. I have a friend of mine with a Tesla, and the build quality isn't so great, but the mystique and the idea around it, and the fact that you're driving around, you know, sort of a George Jetson type of vehicle, I think is where the appeal is. And I've been seeing more and more Teslas in my neighborhood over the past few years, and a lot more actually. It used to be like, ooh, cool, there's a Tesla. Now it's like, oh, there's a Tesla. Oh, there's one over there too. Oh, there's another one in the parking lot. So Teslas have been around, and they seem to be here to stay. And they seem to be at the vanguard of that. Not that other manufacturers haven't made electric vehicles, but they don't seem to have taken hold in the same way Tesla has. And I think it's things like this that helps drive public perception of what the electric vehicle is and what it can offer as far as a quote-unquote zero emissions vehicle. And I've sort of touched on this in the past. I'm like, yeah, electric vehicles are great. We're certainly cutting down on air pollution, but it depends on how you make that power. If you make that the power that you use to charge up that car by burning coal, you're still polluting the atmosphere. Now, is it as much? And you know, there's a lot of arguments that could be made in that sense. But also think about things like battery life. Once the battery is done and no longer useful, what do you do with that? I mean, do you just bury it in the ground, you recycle it? What do you do with that? And speaking of in the ground, the materials that you need to make those batteries, like lithium and such, usually involves things like strip mining, which is also not so great for the environment. So are we robbing Peter to pay Paul here? I'm not really sure, but it seems to be the trend, so much so that President Biden has recently signed an executive order stating that government vehicles are going to be going electric as soon as possible. So we are making efforts. We've heard you, Greta, but as far as diesel engines go and passenger vehicles, I think this really might be the beginning of the end, especially with this major engine plant, diesel engine plant, switching over to electric motor production. And companies like Volvo also talking about switching over to an all-electric fleet or all-electric offerings going forward. Many automakers have seemed to embrace this and seem to be going this route. And once again, going back to Tesla, I kind of think it's his fault for putting the idea in our heads, so to speak. What do you think? I mean, this is a discussion channel. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on the diesel engines. Do you own a diesel vehicle? Do you own an electric vehicle? Do you love it, hate it, that kind of thing? Where do you see this whole thing going? I mean, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are, or read what your thoughts are down in the comments on this, because I think it's interesting the direction this world is going. And I've also done other videos on how electric vehicles, electrifying the vehicle fleet could affect your local mechanic. That was another article that came up. Once again, these are discussions. I'll put links in the description to that video along with other stuff. And if you have automotive questions, I ask that you head to eric@thecarguy.com, which I will also link in the description. The description is going to be chock full of cool stuff, so go there if you have questions or looking for additional information. I want to thank you very much for watching today. Be safe, have fun, stay dirty, and I will see you next time, or down in the comments. See you there.